good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to the first event of the Joseph Rowntree Centenary. It's organised by the Rowntree Society and hosted by York Quakers. We're going to be looking back at Joseph Rowntree's funeral, which took place 100 years ago this weekend. And it's fantastic to be able to do it in this place, as this was the building that Joseph's memorial service took place in, although not in this room and in a very different meeting house to what it is today. I am Nick Smith, the Executive Director of the Rowntree Society. And for those of you who don't know about the Rowntree Society, we're a small educational charity based here in York. And our purpose is to build and share knowledge about the histories of the Rowntree family, company and trust, and also their continuing relevance to the local, national and global challenges that face us today. We're grateful that our primary funding comes from a grant made by the three Joseph Rowntree trusts, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the JRSSCT, managed by the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust, and the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. And as we're going to be talking about Joseph Rowntree's death and funeral, if anyone does need some time or some quiet space, then there is some available. Again, just ask at the desk and they'll show you where to go. We are filming this afternoon. Inkblot Films are recording this event so that we can upload it on our YouTube channel so that we've got a document of it, but also it then becomes accessible to people who weren't able to get here today, of which I know there are quite a few. Okay, so the way this afternoon is going to work is in a few minutes, I'm going to speak a little bit about Joseph Rowntree, but mainly explain what happened over the weekend of his funeral and show some images and explain what we've learned through Rowntree Society research. I'm also delighted to have Barbara Windle with us, who's then going to talk more broadly about Quaker Funerary and memorial customs. And finally, when we were doing the research on Joseph's funeral, it became apparent about how wide his impact was felt. And so we therefore thought the best way to get this across was to reflect some of the people and organisations who paid tribute to him during the Memorial Weekend, but also link them to the present day. So we've invited representatives from organisations who attended his memorial events or similar equivalents. Each of these will say something from the tributes to Joseph at the time and will link it to what the organisations are doing today. When we get to that bit, I'm going to pass the microphone round the room. I'll call out who we need to speak. It will work fine. You might need to trust me on this. So who was Joseph Rowntree? It feels a little bit weird saying this to this room, as probably most of you know, but I'm going to go through it anyway. He was born in York in 1836 into a Quaker family, and he started work in the family grocery business before being brought in to help his brother, Henry Isaac's struggling cocoa company. From there, he built the company to be the internationally recognised Rowntrees & Co. And he really cared about workers' welfare and ethical business practices, provided healthcare, social and financial support to employees. The factory, known as the Cocoa Works, was developed to foster community with sport, education and other out-of-work activities. There was also a structure of workplace democracy with the Central Works Council at the top that brought management and workers together to make decisions on how the factory was run. His impact was not only through the business though. He built the village and community of New Earswick to provide access to good quality housing, and Yearsley Swimming Pool, the Joseph Rowntree Theatre, and green spaces such as Rowntree Park and Homestead Park, the latter of which was open to the public by his son Seabourn. And these are just some of the more obvious examples that he and his family gave to York. There's even more so, he had a major influence on our understanding of poverty and inequality. And he was keen to understand the root causes of those issues in order to find solutions. And this success and the success of the business enabled Joseph to further this work, with him establishing the three trusts which still bear his name and continue to the present day. But it would be amiss of me not to mention recent research we've carried out showing evidence of colonial exploitation within the Rowntree supply chains. And on that, the success of the business was built. You can visit our website to find out more about this. And I'm not mentioning this to take away from the positive impact Joseph Rowntree had, but to recognise that people and their histories are nuanced and complicated. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. So just before we move on, I just want to flag up some of the quotes we've got here. Joseph was a big influence on another person who had a major impact on York, J.B. Morrell. And the quote from him here is a reference to an early 19th century liberal and radical phrase that another Quaker campaigner, John Bright, was like to use. And I think what J.B. Morrell is doing there is saying something about perhaps Joseph being a bit out of time and looking back at earlier ideals. And we'll come back to John Bright in a minute. Joseph was someone who made things happen. He didn't just theorize about what changes were needed. And it was important to him that the outcomes of his impact and that people were helped and benefited from them spoke for themselves, not as a testament to him as a person who did them. And that's the quote from the Quaker academic H.G. Woods there, kind of his testament to that. So Joseph's death. Joseph had retired from being chairman of Rowntree & Co. in 1923, handing over to his son Seabourn. But this didn't stop him from coming into work each day, and he kept his office at the Cocoa Works and enjoyed the community there. And you can see his office at the Cocoa Works there. On Thursday, the 19th of February, Joseph was at the Cocoa Works working on his biography of John Bright. Told you we'd come back to it. And he started to complain of feeling cold, and staff had to persuade him to go home to recover. Over the next few days, he was cared for at his home, Clifton Lodge, by his family. And you can see Clifton Lodge over that side. And his eldest surviving daughter at the time, Agnes, recalled that he didn't complain or show irritability. And each morning he would ask if the birds had been singing and if they could be seen on the lawn. And that's a testament to his love of nature. And he also talked about his regular Saturday trips to Scarborough, where he would often take a member of the Cocoa Works staff with him to watch birds on the coast. And he died at home peacefully in the early afternoon of Tuesday, the 24th of February, aged 88. And you can see we've got newspaper coverage here, and the death was really quickly reported. It would made the evening editions of many newspapers on the 24th of February. It was widely and internationally reported, a testament to how respected he was around the world. And there's just a couple of things to highlight. I know it's not the clearest, but he was recognised for his work on social welfare as much as the business at the time. And you can see that in the Birmingham Evening Dispatch, which is the main bit there. And the reporting of the funeral that followed, the comments were about the large number of people who attended, but also that there was something of a strangeness about it. Quotes such as a simple ceremony, and the Daily Mirror, whose coverage we'll see a bit later, had subheadings such as a Quaker ceremony without mourning clothes, and that people wore coloured ties. And when we talk about Joseph Rowntree's funeral, it wasn't just one event. There were 5 events across the weekend of the 28th of February to the 1st of March 1925. He was cremated in Leeds, and his ashes were brought to his home in Clifton, ready for the weekend. And there's something remarkable about how quickly the arrangements were made in such a short period of time. The times of the events that you can see there are when they were planned for. And I find it incredible that they were able to stick to this schedule, particularly between Friends Meeting House here and the burial ground at the retreat. The main coverage of Joseph's funeral events, as I said before, was by the Daily Mirror, and they had a special memorial edition on the Monday, which is what you see here, and this is what we've been using in our advertising for this event, so you may well have come across that over the last few weeks. I'm now going to go through each of the events and explain what happened. So the first event took place on the Saturday morning at the girls' dining room on the dining block at the Cocoa Works. And you can see the dining block there. It's what is currently the Nuffield Hospital nowadays. The girls' dining room was the biggest space they had at the Cocoa Works, and they needed it, as around 2,500 people attended. It was organised by the Central Works Council, not by the company management. The order of service just contains 3 hymns. It was presided over by Mr. C. Horner, who worked in the deployment department and was also the editor of the Cocoa Works magazine, the in-house company periodical. Other notable speakers included Mrs. Edna Annie Crichton, who was a prominent Quaker in York, and in the 1940s would become the first woman Lord Mayor of York and the first woman alderman of York. In 1925, she'd already been a city councillor for 6 years, and her husband, David S. Crichton, was Rowntree's first welfare officer. He died a few years earlier, and the workers set up a memorial fund in his name for educational scholarships and sporting activities. One of the readings that Annie delivered was John Wilhelm Rowntree's Love and Death, and that's still part of the current edition of Quaker Faith and Practice. John Wilhelm was Joseph's oldest son, who'd passed away in 1905, aged only 37. Other people who spoke at the event was Fred Hawksby, who was the main trade union leader at the factory, Dr. Clarence Northcote, the Rowntree's Australian Labour manager, and Richard Restrope, who was a nonconformist and Quaker preacher who was the first warden of St. Mary's Educational Settlement, his position there being funded by the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. And he led the service in prayer, followed by a long period of silence that's described as impressive. After that silence, they had another hymn, and then they all went out to the rose garden at the factory, where a lime tree was planted in memory of Joseph Rowntree by James Archer, and you can see James Archer with the tree here. James Archer was 82 years old and was a Rowntree's pensioner who'd worked with Joseph from 1882. So in the afternoon, family, close friends and associates gathered at Joseph's house, Clifton Lodge, and a funeral cortege was formed to bring the group to Clifford Street Meeting House, here. And at the same time, a civic procession was making its way from the Mansion House, led by the Lord Mayor, Sir Robert Newbold Key. And you can see both the funeral cortege there and over there the civic procession. The streets were lined with people, and they're described as densely packed, thronged and silent. Flags were flown at half-mast, shops were closed, blinds were pulled down at the Mansion House, other businesses and houses. And you can see some of it with the numbers of people lining the streets in those photos. And when they got to the meeting house, it was in the main room, which no longer exists, but could hold around 1,200 people. And you can see a photo of what it would have looked like just in the corner over there. 1,200 capacity, though, wasn't enough for all the attendees who wanted to be there. So an overflow service took place at Peckett Street Primitive Methodist Church. This no longer exists, but it's part of the old fire station building that is just down the road, a little bit towards the river. So not too far. And I find it interesting that they had an overflow. Did they have two services, or were people running back and forth? Over 50 organisations were represented. Around 25% of them were associated with education. Hymns were sung by choirs from both the Mount and Bootham School. And some of the people who spoke included Arthur Rowntree, who was at the time the headmaster of Bootham School and Joseph's first cousin once removed. Also Sir George Newman, another Bootham School alumni and the country's first chief medical officer. And T. Edmund Harvey, yet another Bootham alumni, he was an MP and social reformer. And also Herbert I. Waller, who was a prominent Quaker. All of the recorded speakers were Quakers, and the actual order of service just contains 3 hymns. The service concluded with what is reported as a short period of silence, and I find it interesting that that's in contrast to the long period of silence at the cocoa works in the morning. And maybe this was to do with time constraints, because they want to get to the retreat for the burial, or potentially different attendees, whether there was something of kind of Quaker ways of being that filtered through the cocoa works. William Foxley Norris, the Dean of York in 1925, wrote the next day that the service had, quote, representatives of every section of the community, and I suppose of every religious body, gathered together in the Friends Meeting House, a place where a great many had never been before. So at the retreat burial grounds, the family cortege made its way from the meeting house to the Quaker burial ground at the retreat. And you can see the family in that far photo there. The route again was lined with people, and when they arrived, the burial ground was already full of hundreds of people. Joseph's casket was carried by William Fox, who was a long-serving cashier at the Rowntree Company. A reading was given by J. Rowntree, either Gillett or Gillet. There may be people who know better than me. He was Joseph's nephew, and he was also named after Joseph. The J stands for Joseph. And he was part of the Quaker banking family in which Barclays has its roots. Richard Restrope, again following his role at the cocoa works in the morning, presided over the interment, saying the final words. And then the Daily Mirror reports that thousands of townsfolk filed past Joseph's grave to pay tribute, laying wreaths and flowers. And this is the centre page of that Daily Mirror special edition on the Monday, where you can see more coverage. We're going to see if we can put this on our website so people will be able to see it better. And at the bottom of the page, which you won't be able to see, but it actually says, a striking feature was the absence, according to Quaker tradition, of mourning. So the following day, on the Sunday, there were two more memorial events. We know less about these, but there was another memorial event here at what was then Clifford Street Friends Meeting House. And this was for those connected with Joseph's work with education. And it was organised by the Adult Schools Association. And then also there was a memorial event at the Folk Hall in New Earswick. And this was organised by New Earswick Village Council, which was made up of residents of the village. So I hope you found that interesting and informative, and it's shown how highly thought of Joseph was in his own day, and how many people and organisations he had an impact on. But also that he was a person of York. He was born here. He didn't move away for any great length of time. And he was able to build both figuratively and literally here in this city. And the work that went into this presentation would not have been possible without the support of the three Joseph Rowntree Trusts, the Borthwick Institute of Archives, and also Maisie, our volunteer researcher, who unfortunately can't be here today. So thank you. I'd like to invite Barbara up to speak.
Well, good afternoon, friends. The title I've been given for today presupposes that Quakers do things somewhat differently from the norm. And when you're dealing with a so-called peculiar people, I think that's fair enough. When he wrote about York in 1900, our historian friend David Rubinstein briefly mentioned various respects in which York Quakers remained obviously different from their fellow citizens. While saying that Quaker dress was a thing of the past, he pointed out that the community's pacifism was a clear marker of difference. Also, the Quakers were keen to live simply in comparison with those in similar financial circumstances to their own. They showed a real distaste for luxury and any display of wealth, and they were very active in opposing alcohol and gambling of any kind. So he concluded that it would be easy to see that in 1900 they stood out as different from the main body of York citizens. 25 years later, the first surprising, if not shocking, decision after Joseph Rowntree's death may well have been the family's decision to have his body cremated. At that period, I feel clear that such an act must have been very unusual, as the cremation took place in Leeds. So I presume that Leeds was the nearest place where this could happen. And the casket of ashes must have been returned to the family within 24 hours, or it would have been too late to be carried, as it was, in procession to the meeting house by one of the civic party. My guess, I cannot be certain, is that this may have been the first casket parade in York. So to Saturday afternoon. The Quaker meeting to give thanks for the grace of God as seen in J.R.'s life did not take place, as Nick has said, where we are meeting today. We are within the same complex, but the Victorian buildings that then constituted Clifford Street Meeting, and whose front steps are still a prominent feature of that street, comprise two inner main areas. The surviving one we're using today, being much the smaller, was simply known as the small meeting room, a typically exciting Quaker name. The large meeting room, more exciting Quaker nomenclature, that stood alongside it, was built with a gallery to house both the Mount and Bootham schools for Sunday worship each week, while the ground floor accommodated all the adult worshippers. And as has been said, it was necessary to use Peckett Street Methodist Church as an overflow venue, though how that could work in practical terms, I cannot imagine. I've been asked to concentrate on things that may have seemed strange to the people attending that meeting in 1925. Non-Quakers coming to the meeting may well have had very vague ideas about what they would find. The Quaker religious outlook at that period was undoubtedly Christian, not something one simply takes for granted in Quakers now. But its Christianity was seriously different from the mainstream. First, Quakerism has always been without sacraments in the sense that other churches know them. For us, such ideas were and are to be understood purely metaphorically and spiritually. They are seen as inward matters, not helped by outward gestures. And outward gestures as against substance have never been very agreeable to friends. Next, their approach to the Bible was very different. Believing in continuing revelation, Quakers have always been free to read the Bible critically, open to new light. So knowing the text has been thousands of years in the writing, they realized it encompassed huge changes in human understanding of the world and thinking about God. Their Quaker commitment to peace meant they did not see Old Testament vengeance and frequent warfare as a right pattern of behavior. They were open-minded to science, and Darwinism did not threaten their faith. What mattered to them was the life of Jesus in particular, then the rest of the New Testament. Together, these were a guide to right thinking and behavior. And Quakers, being open to fresh light, were not prescriptive of what other people's inner convictions should be. In 1901, York Meeting reported on the spiritual state of friends within it. And it included the words, "There is great divergence of religious thought among us, but a spirit of love and unity prevails." That clear message has always been a gold thread running through the society's thinking, that being a Quaker does not mean uniformity of religious outlook. We are each walking our own spiritual journey. To my mind, two basic principles must have been particularly visible to newcomers at the meeting giving thanks for Joseph Rowntree's life. Quakerism is not a notion but a way rooted in personal experience. Early friends shocked their contemporaries by arguing that Jesus did not found a religion of the book but of action. Quakerism has no list of dogmas to be swallowed whole. While it always seeks to look afresh in interpreting religious texts, it argues that they only become real when they are lived out. In other words, religion is not a question of abstract ideas, not a notion, but of what we actually do, think, and are. This is the challenge that cut Margaret Fell to the heart in the 1650s, when she heard George Fox say, "You will say Christ said this, and the apostles say this, but what canst thou say? And what thou speakest, is it inwardly from God?" So, not a notion, but a way of being. This is certainly something seen in Joseph Rowntree's life. Speaking about religion was something he didn't do. Initiating new projects that would benefit his workers and his retired workers too, things of that ilk, he did. Education and welfare schemes were only two in the growing programme of enrichment at the cocoa works that went on for decades. And all his adult life, he would come home from the day's work and teach in the adult school union classes. In that period, they were the essential free means by which ordinary people could expand their education beyond the basics they had learned at school. J.R.'s years of adult school union teaching were described by one wise friend as Joseph's university, bringing him close to the lives of those he could not otherwise have known in that intimate way. Equality was the other Quaker basis that you couldn't miss in J.R.'s memorial meeting. The idea of all human beings as equal before God is a notion that may widely receive nods and lip service, but as for lived experience, for 17th century Quakers, living it out meant refusing to remove your hat to anyone that the world judged to be superior in status to you. Keeping your hat on meant going to prison for your audacity. In religious terms, it meant and means not giving primacy to the religious authority of any clergy simply because they are clergy. Quaker equality is always applied to women too, an extraordinary idea in the 17th century, and still so in too much of the world today. Equality before God is not sameness as one another. Thank heaven we are all different in our interests, our talents, and our strengths. We carry different responsibilities in life. The child does not carry equal responsibility to its parent or teacher, nor the worker to the factory owner. But all teachers, parents, business owners can show by how they listen to those for whom they are responsible, whether or not they really believe that all are worthy of being respected and truly heard. J.R. was known as a serious listener, open to what he heard and ready to act on it. He very rarely spoke of his religious convictions. Despite being a lifelong member of Clifford Street meeting, he is only known ever to have spoken once in worship there in all those years. But his life showed serene faith. One close friend wrote, "I have felt that whereas some of us get gleams only, he had a continual perception of the inward light." So as people arrived at Clifford Street at 2:30 on that day, there would be lots to surprise and indeed to shock, strange things to take in. I'll start with the obvious externals. The starkly unadorned simplicity of their surroundings must have been amazing. On entering, they would be greeted by welcomers, but they wouldn't be wearing distinctive, expensive robes to signal their function. Once inside, there were no special pews for the people who mattered. All the seating consisted only of plain benches. The civic robed dignitaries had no separate seating from anyone else. There was no distinction to be made between far-flung Quaker friends and representatives from all over the UK and local people from the York's Adult School Union. As in any Quaker meeting, nothing would mark out certain categories. What would surprise or shock them as they sat down? I think it was largely a matter of what was missing. What were they to look at? There was no stained glass in the windows. There were no religious pictures on the walls. There was no focal point of an altar, no cross, no coloured statues. There were not even memorial plaques on the walls and no high vaulted Gothic architecture. Surely there must be something. They may have wondered what made this a sacred space when all the familiar trappings were not present. There was not even a pulpit to raise any speakers above the common herd. Where was one to focus one's attention when everything pointed towards the centre, but at the centre was a mere table? Where was the musical introduction, the hymn books, the prayer books? The total lack of sound must have been a shock. What was one to do while waiting? There was nothing to distract one from those uncomfortable benches and one's worry about having an incipient cough or a tickle. What were the protocols? Would everyone stand when the ashes casket was brought in? These disciplines and anxieties are not readily absorbed on a first visit. Another problem referred to by Nick would be the dress codes. They had come dressed for a great occasion, for the pomp and ceremony of a consciously momentous event. Of course, they were in deep mourning gear. Yet here were these Quakers, these men, actually flaunting coloured ties. And the women's dresses, well, maybe they were a little bit drab, but they were certainly not in the proper, obligatory funereal black. What was going on? And how could one tell when the meeting would begin without a processional priestly entry to make it obvious? There didn't seem to be any signal one could pick up. There's the whole surprise of no programming. Quaker meetings have no set format, and that applies to funerary events too. Our Book of Discipline offers a few suggestions to help anyone acting as an elder, but nothing is standard, nothing is laid down. At every meeting we wait on the Spirit to guide us. So instead of a proper order of service, all they'd been handed was a flimsy paper giving the words of 3 hymns. Those in Clifford Street meeting for the first time may well have feared that they might find themselves floundering. So let's assume that by now the stated start time has arrived. Someone has stood up and, speaking from his place, without moving centre stage, the opening words are being said. I do not know, but I imagine that they will have been not unlike those we would use in similar circumstances today. The elder would want to establish the purpose of the meeting for worship, perhaps by welcoming those present and adding something on these lines. We gather today to give thanks for the grace of God as we have seen it expressed in the life of our friend Joseph Rowntree. In the silence, we shall concentrate our thoughts and gratitude on what he has been to us and to our city, and we shall hear vocal ministry as and when friends feel called to give it. That sort of opening clarifies 2 things. That the worship's focus is gratitude for a life well lived. It is not an invitation to mourn. After all, J.R.'s life had reached a fitting conclusion, peacefully at home as he was with his family. It also indicates that out of the silence, anyone who feels called to do so may stand and speak. The first hymn was led by the Quaker schools. Then George Newman opened the vocal ministry, speaking of enduring thankfulness for a happy life. Closing in full ripeness. Joseph Rowntree, he said, needs no mausoleum. Rather, we should all be welcoming him into our hearts and minds, where thinking of the glory of his character will stir us into fresh action as occasion calls. So that rhythm of silence, broken from time to time by a few speakers, continued, as others enlarged on the theme of gratitude for God's grace seen in a life so wonderfully generous, imaginative, and productive, one that had reached a harmonious close and would continue to be an inspiration and a spur to future action, a reminder to us all to seek to live in the same spirit of grace, whether they had witnessed that grace at work or adult school, in meeting house or family life. In all this, remember that no sign of the cross was made over any body or any object, and no formal prayers were offered for the dead. After a further silence and communal singing of "The King of Love, my shepherd is," the vast procession then walked rather more than a mile to the Quaker burial ground in the garden of the retreat. But the burial ground itself will have been the final shock to anyone who had not previously been there. The ultimate Quaker testimony to equality is demonstrated by the graves themselves. All are uniform in size, in style, in wording. There are no ornate, oversized sculptures and no grand inscriptions. Here were, and are, only rows and rows of identical, low, round-headed stones, differing from each other only in the names and dates recorded on each. None carries any eulogy about the deceased, J.R.'s stone being no different from anyone else's. Small as it is shared with 2 other members of his family. I can't help feeling that as they looked back on this experience much later, many people who had initially been profoundly surprised may well have recalled the day as feeling absolutely right to be the farewell for a very special human being.
So the way we're going to do this with the speakers from different organisations is we're going to do it as a little bit of a nod to Quaker meeting traditions. Our representatives of organisations are spread throughout the room. I don't even know where everyone is. So I have an order. I'm going to call people out. If you could then stand up, Liv will come over with the microphone. It's important we use the microphone so that we can pick it up on the filming. And then we'll go on to the next person. And if I could request that you stick strictly to your 5-minute limit, just because we've got a lot of people to get through, okay? So first of all, I'd like to go to Councillor Michael Pavlovich from City of York Council.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm honoured to be here this afternoon to represent City of York Council to commemorate the centenary of Joseph Rowntree's funeral. Although I'm not originally from York, even in my hometown of Halifax, we still hold the Rowntree name with great respect. When I was a child, my mum worked at the Rowntree Macintosh factory just by the station, on the toffee crisp line, if I remember correctly. We thought it was great when she brought the sweets back from the factory shop and thought she had the best job in the world. Although she had retired for a couple of years when she died, our family were profoundly touched to receive a bouquet of flowers and a lovely letter of condolence from Rowntree's head office in York. I think that speaks volumes about the principles that Joseph Rowntree imbued in the company, the care for the staff. And these lasted long after his death. His influence on every aspect of life in York and philanthropy were huge then and still echo through to the present day. Granted the freedom of the city in 1911, on his passing, the Lord Mayor in 1925, Sir Robert Newbold-Kay, spoke for the city when he wrote, "Our city has lost its most influential honorary freeman, whose works will live long to remind us and the generations who follow that he was a pioneer in thought and practice for the well-being of the toiling of the city and country, who I'm sure will long hold his name in faithful remembrance." That sentiment of loss of a great thinker and influencer, not only in principles, but also in delivery, was clear. The creation of New Yearswick Village in 1902 preceded the first council house building in York by 20 years, and York was itself a forerunner in the creation of council homes for heroes after the First World War. The homes themselves, with thick walls and gardens, were the standard that the architects have used from the first council houses in Tang Hall and for generations thereafter. The slums of the day, the poverty and the high rates of both infant and mortality needed a visionary thinker and a visionary approach to create the environment for change, and it cannot be underestimated how unusual this was at the time. Fresh air and exercise opportunities were created. Yearsley baths were built and donated to the city in 1909, and Rowntree Park was donated in 1921 for the enjoyment of all, not just his factory workers. And it's appropriate to see Joseph Rowntree as one of the first pioneers of public health. It's therefore no surprise that days after his death, the City Council passed the following resolution: that the Council offers to the members of his family its sincere sympathy on the death of the late Mr. Joseph Rowntree, honorary freeman of the city, and places on record its high appreciation of the great services rendered by Mr. Rowntree to the city and his fellow citizens, recalling his noble character and high ideals and his sustained and unselfish efforts for the good of all in matters of education, health, recreation, and social well-being. Joseph Rowntree was not a man of his time. His belief in social justice, of respect for the dignity of his workers and the residents of his city, shaped by his faith, were so far ahead of their time that he had to demonstrate what his vision could be. Community created, not bearing the stamp of charity in his own words, but of civic responsibility. We in York Council are still applying the principles of Joseph Rowntree. We strive to create healthy, inclusive communities with tolerance and compassion. It's not without a sense of the spirit of Joseph Rowntree that York is a city of sanctuary and the first human rights city, that we are creating affordable housing, supported housing, and are committed to ending street homelessness. The lighting of the city walls in blue and orange earlier this week was a small gesture of our ongoing thanks and commemoration of a visionary man who improved the lives of thousands, employed tens of thousands, and whose legacy lives on in the village he created, the parks he built, the sports and cultural facilities he provided, and most of all, the care for our neighbours from near and far, that the people of York retain. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. That's great. And if we could go to Richard Watson from York Liberal Democrats.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Richard Watson and I'm the current president of the York Liberal Democrats. I'm acutely aware that in that respect I stand in the shoes once worn by Joseph Rowntree, and that is a very humbling experience. My practical involvement is as a councillor here in York, but also, although I'm now retired, I was a solicitor at Crombie Wilkinson, which adjoins these premises, for 35 years. The Wilkinson connection with Quakerism and the Rowntrees was great, and therefore I had the pleasure of being involved with work with some Rowntrees and the trusts. Joseph Rowntree was a founder of the York Liberal Association. His political work was behind the scenes, and unlike some of his relatives, he never stood for election, but his nephew Arnold was Liberal MP for York. It was recorded by the Liberal Association on the occasion of his golden wedding anniversary in 1917 that our minute books record instance after instance in which you have guided us rightly and wisely in moments of doubt and difficulty, and cheered us by your hopeful idealism in dark days. We still retain a vivid recollection of the time when you habitually inspired our councils and presided at our meetings. We remember your ability as chairman, and with what tact and judgment you led without driving us to choose the course of true liberalism. For what we liked and admired in you was especially your conviction that the Liberal Party and the interests of the association were not ends in themselves, but only means to the accomplishment of justice and progress for the nation and the world. The liberalism of the Victorian age was a fine thing, and there was no one who held the faith more truly and more effectually than you. Instances crowd upon us, including the great causes of peace, of international fair dealing, of free trade, and the establishment of free democracies. If the association has in any degree upheld these high principles, it is you more than any other man than it is due, and we are happy that this milestone in your life gives the opportunity to tell you how gratefully we remember your services and how real is our affection and esteem for the true liberal who gave them. And after Joseph Rowntree's death, the party said, the association records its deep regret at the passing of Joseph Rowntree, who for so many years was the honoured president of the association and who throughout his long life served his fellow men with great devotion and always sought to establish liberty, peace and goodwill. I'm asked now to do a compare and contrast. So how have these values been maintained by the Liberals and since 1988 the Liberal Democrats, and what is their path from then to now? It was Cober Rowntree's study of poverty which hugely influenced David Lloyd George, giving rise to the People's Budget and the introduction of the state pension, unemployment benefit and social security. Moving forward 17 years after Joseph Rowntree's death, the report of William Beveridge developed these principles, identifying the social malaise of want, squalor, ignorance, sickness, and idleness. That report in turn gave rise to the post-war settlement of the welfare state, which, despite a bumpy ride, remains entrenched in our society today. In recent times, Lib Dem policies such as pupil premium and the triple lock have been geared to alleviate poverty, and a significant campaign has raised awareness and more money for the treatment of mental health issues. On the international scene, the Lib Dems have championed free trade, not least with their unequivocal support for remaining in the EU, and they opposed the Second Iraq War. Local examples concerning housing include the releasing of land to allow for the building of the fabulous Hartwig Oaks and the creation of a housing association to assist the continuance of public rented housing in northern York. In education, 3 secondary and 5 primary schools have been rebuilt. The bedrock of the Liberal Democrats today is the preamble to its constitution, which reads, "The Liberal Democrats exist to build and safeguard a fair, free and open society in which we seek to balance the fundamental values of liberty, equality and community, and in which no one shall be enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity." I hope that this encapsulates the values of Joseph Rowntree, and I hope he would approve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. And if we could go to Giles representing Nestlé.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Giles Nash, and I'm here representing Nestlé Confectionery, or the Cocoa Works, as it was back in 1925. So my role there is innovation and renovation project lead across Zone Europe. So I have the exciting job of developing all new confectionery, doing lots of tastings, lots of new ideas coming through. And so it's really special for me to think back 120 years when Joseph was doing exactly the same thing, signing off on new confectionery and making sure that quality was there. And that's exactly what I do today. But what's really special for me is that I'm also happen to be Joseph's great-great-grandson. So really special for me to do the same thing 120, 140 years later and still be involved in the business as it was then. So in preparation for today, I was given by Nick a number of quotes from members of the Cocoa Works and what they wrote to remember Joseph. And there were some really clear themes that were coming out in what was said around the type of person he was, the business that he wanted to develop, and just that air of calmness that he embodied within the work that he did. And there's one quote that really summed that up, and it was published in the Cocoa Works magazine. And it was, "All those that worked with Joseph Rowntree in the factories bear witness to his geniality and helpfulness, to his unceasing altruism, and his meticulous care that the product of the factory should be of the highest possible quality. Every detail claimed his exhaustive attention. None can recollect any show of anger." And I thought that really nicely summed up the type of person that he was. And Nick talked earlier about how he'd stop members of staff in the corridor, have a chat, and then invite them on his trips to Scarborough on a Sunday. Now, thinking back today, that would instill fear in people, but actually, I think really lovely thing to do, and just showed that he was kind of a man of the people. There was no superiority in what he did. And another quote said that there was an atmosphere of peace and personal kindness to the office. And again, in preparation for today, I had a conversation with our managing director, a chap called Mark Davies, about what his thoughts and what that legacy had left on the business as it was today. And Mark joined Nestlé in 1990 on the graduate scheme. And he's worked his way up the business, worked all the way around the world for different parts of the business in different locations. And he came back to York 2 years ago to become the managing director for confectionery. And the thing that he said was that York just has a different atmosphere, a different vibe. The office is very different. Nestlé can be very corporate Swiss company, but actually in York there is still that air of calmness, of kindness. And that's flowed through the generations of people that have worked there. We've got so many people that have worked generation after generation for Rowntrees and then for Nestlé. And really it's really nice to see that there is just a different air around the business in York, which I think is really special and really nice to have passed down. And also looking back at the legacy that's been left behind in terms of the business. So what can we say about that? So York is still 100 years later a major manufacturing centre. It's known around the world for its confectionery. You can smell it in the air around York. And yes, whilst the site is different, it's now owned by Nestlé. It's still a major employer. 2,000 people as opposed to the 7,000 that there was in 1925. So yes, it's different, but it's a very different business. Efficiency, different fast production lines. Those of you from York will have seen the old Victorian building being developed into very nice flats. I think it looks fantastic now. But the business is still investing in York, still vested in the site. 85 million's been invested in the last 10 years. So really, it's great to see that legacy ongoing, still employing generation after generation of people on that site. And what we're trying to do as well is the reason why I've been asked to get involved, really build that connection with the Rowntree Society, and how does a business work with the community more and more. And that's what we're really keen to do over the next year. We'll be opening up the business for York Unlocked later on in the year, so getting people to better understand what we do today, the confectionery business, understand some of that history. So you'll be able to book tickets. We've got the Global Research and Development Centre for Confectionery is based in York, the fancy building on Hexby Road. So we'll be opening that to just share a bit about the history, the legacy, an ongoing business and what we're doing. So really excited to get involved, and it's, as I say, a real privilege for me to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Giles.
Who's our U3A speaker? Oh, amazing, thank you.
Brilliant. I'm going to hand over to David from the U3A.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Professor David Morn-Brown, immediate past chair of the City of York branch of the University of the Third Age, or U3A for short. And I'm very pleased to have been asked to represent the U3A at this commemorative event. For those who may not be familiar with the U3A, we are an organization which aims to encourage people no longer in full-time work to come together to enjoy subjects of interest to them and to take part in a range of games and outdoor activities. We have over 1,700 members in York and offer around 140 different interest groups ranging from medieval literature and modern European languages to petanque, gardening, go and rummikub. All our groups are taught or led by our members. All our activities are undertaken on an unpaid and voluntary basis. We have an excellent relationship and very close structural link with the meeting house, in that our office and 2 meeting rooms, for which we have recently been delighted to sign a further 10-year lease, are housed immediately below us. The rationale for U3A being represented here today, despite the fact that the U3A wasn't established in York until 1992, 67 years after Joseph Rowntree's death, has to do with Joseph Rowntree's very active promotion of adult education, both formal and informal. Even the most cursory reading of his biography makes it clear that he had a passion for lifelong learning and was concerned that everybody should have access to it wherever possible. Sorry, I need to sit down. Whether this was through libraries, the adult schools, education settlements, debating societies, or the education offerings at the factory, an organization like the U3A, had it been around, would have fitted seamlessly onto the end of that list. As the Rowntree Society's very comprehensive website tells us, Joseph Rowntree first took charge of a class at the adult education school on Sunday mornings himself when he was 21, and he carried on until he was nearly 60 before he stopped. The adult school was, as one would have expected, part religious and part educational, but what one might not have expected of such an institution at that time was the extent to which it was also concerned with leisure and the well-being of the whole person, as is very much the case with U3A. As the website again tells us, there were choral competitions, cricket and fishing matches, and even unusual activities like linnet singing and aircraft building. The parallels are striking. Our U3A has a choir, a singing together group, and a rather oddly termed can't sing, won't sing group, which does, however, despite the apparent odds, sing. We have a trout fishing group, and the Ilkley 3A may, with time, succeed in persuading us to set up a walking cricket group to compete with theirs. We don't indulge in linnet singing competitions. Linnets are hard to come by these days, and the RSPB might have something to say about it, but we do have 3 bird watching groups. Nor do we build any aircraft, but our U3A does boast a drone flying group whose activities, I hasten to add, take place well away from the meeting house. The St. Mary's settlement, which opened in York in 1909 under Joseph Rowntree's influence, had a distinctively religious curriculum initially, but as Mark Freeman tells us, it soon broadened to embrace courses on international relations, economics, literature, history, science, and nature, all of which chime with interest groups currently on the books of the York U3A. And while in the interest of avoiding conflicts, the U3A's guiding principles expressly veto the advocacy, and I stress the advocacy, of any particular religion or political persuasion, 2 of Joseph Rowntree's major interests. They don't veto their academic study, and we do have groups that study the Bible and that explore the various political isms. In short, despite the 67-year interval between the funeral we are commemorating today and the establishment of the University of the Third Age in England, it can be seen that there's a remarkable degree of overlap between Joseph Rowntree's advocacy and promotion of adult and lifelong learning and the enrichment of the lives of the retirement community in York aimed at by the U3A. We are accordingly deeply appreciative of the opportunity to take part in this august ceremonial. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Can I call on the representatives of the Mount School, please?
Hello everyone, I'm Lisa and I'm here to speak on behalf of the Mount School York and to describe the influence that Joseph Rowntree has had on our beloved Quaker school. I'm a boarder from Ukraine and I'm happy to be here today and to celebrate the legacy of Joseph Rowntree at the Mount School York. This year, we celebrate our 240th year at the Mount School York since we first opened our doors on Trinity Lane. When we talk about the influence of Joseph Rowntree here at the Mount, we cannot overstate the legacy that he and his wider family has had on our history, our character as a school, and how it continues to influence our education today. Our site at the Mount was sought after Joseph Rowntree Sr. asked at York Quakery Quarterly meeting whether there was still an interest in continuing a Quaker Girls' School here in York in 1855. There had been a long period of illness in the city and at our former site at Castlegate, and after the answer came back as a yes, Joseph Rowntree and founders settled on the site at the Mount. The influence of the family has even entered our language at the Mount, and into our school lexicon. We still call our first break chocolate lunch long after the tradition has ended of the Quaker chocolate factories giving the schoolgirls chocolate in break time. Our schoolhouses are named after Quakers and chocolateries, and I'm proudly speak to you today as the head of Rowntree's house. Our summer bowl is still called the Strawberry Bowl. This was the name of the summer bowl in the time when each girl was invited to the Rowntrees and gifted a pound of strawberries each. This year, we're organizing a project with seed money from the Mount School Social Service Training Endowment Fund, which was set by Joseph Rowntree himself to enhance the education of Mount pupils. It is there to promote education in an area he felt was most important in the promotion of social work. The aims of efforts of the Endowment Fund set up by Joseph Rowntree clearly demonstrate that he was a social visionary with his desire to widen the scope of education to train Mount pupils in the social field. In 1979, Jean Rowntree, who became a trustee of the training fund, wrote in an accompanying document, Joseph Rowntree described the qualities needed in a social worker that it is our most importance that the social worker should have a just and wide outlook of life, which would require some special teaching of history brought down to modern times with emphasis on the condition of people at different periods and different countries. She considers this a plea of social history, and of course, wider than we can see his consideration and interest as national and international, which was not at that time a usual part of the school's curriculum. Joseph Rowntree also sat at our school committee and sent his daughters to the Mount. He involved himself personally in the educational projects, including those which had international perspectives. I quote Sarah Shields, historian and former Mount School staff member, who wrote in her Mount School history book, Among Friends, that in the 1920s, the staff of the Mount School were firm believers in the League of Nations as a force for international peace and understanding in the future. A model meeting was held at the Mount to illustrate. Speeches were written, and the elderly Joseph Rowntree helped one young researcher with her speech on Serbia. She remembered, that was typical of Joseph Rowntree's interest in everybody and everything, even the affairs of a schoolgirl. From schoolgirl to international peace, we can see how Joseph Rowntree made the connection that education is a singular tool to achieve peace and a more prosperous and fair society. Jean Rowntree describes how Joseph Rowntree asked himself how peace could be achieved, quoting Norman Angell, who said, "Peace is not a section of certain social problems which we have to solve, not one of many. It is the basis of the whole of the democratic and social problem." To answer this question on how to bring about peace and why he took it upon himself to be so deeply interested in the Mount and education, I leave you with the words of Joseph Rowntree. He writes, "We shall greatly wish that scholars, generally, may have so strong and intelligent a grasp of this great question that they may be qualified after leaving school to help in the formation of the true public opinion. All the Mount School York community would like to give our great thanks to Joseph Rowntree for the depth of character and spirit he imbued, embodied and gifted our dedications to which will continue to hold true. May his vision and peace through education be achieved." Thank you.
Thank you. And if we could have our representatives from Bootham School.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Smith. I'm the head of Bootham School, and as you can see, I'm the lesser half of a double act here representing the school today. So Bootham School is a Quaker school in the centre of York. In many ways, we offer what you'd expect from an independent school. We have knowledgeable and passionate teachers. There's an emphasis on personalised, well-resourced pastoral care and personal management, with strong academic results and a proven record of helping students win a place on their chosen academic course, with a huge range of sporting, cultural and outdoors opportunities available to all. That much you'd expect from a school. But we also offer some things people would not expect from a typical independent school. Arising from our Quaker foundation, practices and heritage, Bootham has a much clearer understanding of the ultimate purpose of the education that it offers than any school I've encountered before. Assemblies are held in the form of a Quaker meeting, with the chairs laid in a square, and any member of the community can stand and speak. Students address the staff by their first names, and that emphasises our commitment to equality. The school goes about helping students to achieve lifelong success and flourishing in a different way, not by emphasising conformity or the primacy of exam-related endeavour, but rather the development of intrinsic motivation and individuality, that of God in Quaker language. And all this in the context of a hugely supportive community that's founded on clear, enduring, well-practiced and well-understood values. It's an approach that produces students who leave the school comfortable in their own skin, confident in the unique combination of strengths and talents that they have been helped to develop, and they're aware of their responsibility to let their lives speak, which to me means to make the world that they're going into a better, fairer, and more peaceful place. I'm going to introduce now Joe Mottram. Now, Joe is one of our head reeves. In any other school, he'd be called head boy. And as I discovered only after I appointed him, he is another direct descendant of Joseph Rowntree. And Joe's going to say something about his great-great-great-grandfather's time at Bootham and the impact that Joseph continued to have after his school days.
Joseph Rowntree was a pupil at Bootham between 1847 and 1852. When he died in 1925, our old scholars, which is what we call our alumni, described him as the best friend the school ever had, and gave tribute to the one who loved it deeply, who helped it generously, and who was ever willing to share his wise experience and his mature judgment in all matters concerning its welfare. Joseph attended Bootham from the age of 11 and spent 5 years there. Although little is known of his scholastic career, he was an enthusiastic member of the Natural History Society. When at school, he was a keen athlete and an ardent naturalist, noted by the school magazine. The school helped to simulate a love of learning and an interest in the outdoors. His generosity to the school included establishing bursaries and giving generously to the school rebuilding fund after a fire in 1899. He also served as a member of the Governor's Committee between 1872 and 1919. When he retired from the committee in 1919, his fellow committee members noted, "Among those who retire from the school's committee this year is our valued friend and colleague, Joseph Rowntree, who has served on the committee without a break since the year 1872. During this long period, Joseph Rowntree has given unstinted service to both Bootham and the Mount, and on several occasions has made generous gifts to the schools by way of scholarships and endowment. On his retirement, his colleagues desire to express to Joseph Rowntree their affectionate regard and warm thanks for all he has done for the two schools." Thank you.
I just wanted to add to Joe's words there something about the ongoing legacy of Joseph Rowntree at our school. So after that fire in 1899, the new buildings were opened in 1902, which remain in use today as really the core part of our school campus. The house that Joseph rented for his young family between 1875 and 1882, which is number 49 Bootham, Bootham being the name of the road outside the school as well as the school itself. That house is now one of our school boarding houses. You'll see a plaque to Joseph Rowntree on there if you walk past. And that boarding house is known as Rowntree House. And our Natural History Society continues to flourish, as does our students' commitment to the sustainability of our environment. When Joseph died in 1925, it was noted that he took the deepest interest in the schools and showed it in many ways. The scholarships founded by Joseph Rowntree to enable boys and girls to enter the schools who might otherwise have been prevented have been of the greatest benefit to the schools. Although, after a century, those funds are long exhausted, we continue his tradition of supporting students who might otherwise be prevented from benefiting from a Bootham education, largely through our involvement with the Royal National Children's Springboard Foundation. Thanks in large part to the generosity of a new generation of benefactors, we offer fully funded boarding bursary places for children who most need access to the opportunities our school can provide. We prioritise those children who are in or have experience of the care system, giving life-changing opportunities in an outstanding boarding school to those young people who have had the worst starts in life. We would like to do more. But we believe our approach is very much in accordance with Joseph Rowntree's mission to support Quaker values and to give a leg up to those in his own community who've been less fortunate in their circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we could have someone speaking from Cober Hill.
I do. Hi, my name's Michael Sturge. I came to York in 1980 as Deputy Director of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And during my 32 years there were a number of comments, often in the Post, that Joseph Rowntree would turn in his grave at some of the things we were doing. Well, as a Quaker, one of my jobs was to maintain the records of the burial ground at the retreat, so I can confirm that this was not the case. And although over the past 100 years, the gravestone may have tilted just a little bit over time, and there's been no other movement. But my role today is to talk about Cober Hill, which I hope many of you will know. And in doing so, I want to actually talk about two other of my Quaker heroes of the Rowntree family, both who have been mentioned already today. The first is his eldest son, John Wilhelm Rowntree, who died at the age of 37. And in thinking about what I might say today, I reflect that Joseph's first wife died just 1 year after their marriage. His eldest son died at age 37. And I think it was probably his eldest grandson, died in 1917 in the First World War. So this man who we celebrate, what he had to bear in his life and to overcome, what a remarkable inward strength he must have had. Now, John Wilhelm had a huge impact on the Society of Friends. In the Victorian era, the Society of Friends became very inward-looking. It wore plain clothes, it rejected the arts. If you married outside the society, you became disowned. And if that had continued, I think the Society of Friends would have slowly died. And John Wilhelm was one of those who had the vision and the drive to open the society to the 20th century. He also recognized that Quakers with no paid ministry had to, in a sense, self-teach. And he was one of the driving forces, in conjunction with George Cadbury, in the foundation of Woodbrook College in Birmingham in 1904. And that was for Quakers, but as we've heard, John Wilhelm shared the interest of his father and many other Quakers in adult education. And then this links in with my second hero, Arnold Rowntree, Joseph's nephew. I've heard it say equivalent to a fourth son, but that's just what I've heard. As we've heard, Liberal MP for York during the First World War. And Arnold Rowntree founded Cober Hill. Now, Cober Hill is a building, a guest house, conference centre between Scarborough and Whitby. And I'd like to read to you the paper, part of the paper, which Arnold Rowntree wrote to the trustees of the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust in May 1920. I believe that if the new recreative, educational and conference centre at Cober Hill, which I have helped to start, can be made thoroughly successful, it is one of those experiments which will be copied in other parts of the country to the great advantage of all concerned. And that sentiment is so typical of Joseph Rowntree and the Rowntree family. They didn't just want to do good, they wanted to be an example, a beacon for others to follow. He continues, I have in mind several conversations I had with JWR. Now, these Rowntrees always refer to each other by their initials. So John JWR is, of course, John Wilhelm. When he talked over with me his hopes regarding Friedenstahl. Friedenstahl is a property in Scarborough, which was used by the adult school movement at the start of the 20th century. I believe it is difficult to overestimate the inspiration that both individuals and organizations have obtained from their association with that place. I trust that Cober Hill may be able to realize yet more further many of JWR's hopes. I want it to be a place of joy and beauty. I desire that the place should be made a center of refreshment and inspiration. 105 years on, we continue. I have a leaflet to Cober Hill. I'll leave it out in the hall. Set in 11 acres of stunning grounds, nestled on the North Yorkshire moors and heritage coast, with 67 ensuite bedrooms overlooking the beautiful surrounding area and sea views. Facilities include 4 large lounges to relax and unwind in, a theatre, hall and conservatory for conferences and activities, a tranquil secret garden to explore, etc. It was owned by 2 of the Rowntree Trusts for many years, but since 2017, it is now wholly owned by the Cober Hill Charitable Trust. And I'm delighted that 2 of the trustees of that trust are direct descendants of the Rowntree family we've been talking about. Our mission remains, as Arnold Rowntree's, to provide refreshment, and that is refreshment, of course, of the spirit, to provide refreshment and inspiration for groups and individuals. And in our small way, we are trying to keep the Rowntree legacy alive and relevant. If you haven't been, you'd be most welcome.
Thank you, Michael. And can we hear from the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust?
Hello. Oh, just on. Sorry. Hello. My name's Sophie Long. I'm the head of programs at Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. Thanks very much for organising this and for having us. Some people might know JRCT, some people might know the foundation a little bit better, so I'll just tell you who we are. So we're an independent Quaker trust. We're established with part of the Rowntree Endowment. Our mission is to address the root causes of conflict and injustice. So that was part of Joseph's instruction. And we do that through making grants. So we fund organisations to try and build a better world. And I'm not from York, I'm from Northern Ireland, where I lived through the benefit of what JRCT did and what Joseph Rowntree wanted to achieve. And weirdly, my mum worked on a project funded by JRCT, which was with victims of the conflict and the perpetrators of the conflict in Northern Ireland to come together and understand one another's common humanity. And if you ever go to Northern Ireland and mention Joseph Rowntree, there's deep love and respect for JRCT and the Rowntree name there, because it's partly what Barbara was mentioning earlier. It was the kind of practical application of Quaker values in Northern Ireland, which was non-judgmentally and patiently funding the work that was needed to bring about peace and human rights in Northern Ireland. And that's been going on for, over 50 years and is only possible because of the endowment that Joseph left, but also the vision that he had. So today we're based in Homestead Park, just along the path from the foundation. We're in the garden house. We're quite a small organisation, like 20 or 30 staff. But we spend quite a lot of money because he left us quite a lot of money. So he's a very successful businessman. So we spend around £14 million a year. All the funding programs are rooted in Quaker values. So it's essentially about building a better and fairer world. And we think about Joseph's vision when we're doing our grant making. So one of the things that he said was, I don't want you to use this money to fund soup kitchens. I want you to work out why soup kitchens exist and fix that problem. And we do that today. So we have a grant to an organisation called Cooperation Town. And what they do is they set up cooperatives, local cooperatives of neighbours and residents. And they come together and they buy food in bulk together. And then they run education together about why the food system is as it is, why they don't have green spaces, why their housing isn't good. And so that is a direct consequence of that instruction. So don't fund soup kitchens, address the reason why they exist. And so looking back to JRCT's marking of Joseph's death, we have a copy of the minute. And that meeting was the board meeting of the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, and it was on Monday, the 25th of May, 1925. And the meeting was chaired by his nephew Arnold. So this is the minute. At this meeting of the trust, the first held since the death of the founder, the surviving trustees expressed their gratitude for the opportunity given to them by the generosity of the founder to assist important religious and educational work in connection with the Society of Friends, the adult school and other movements, as well as the application of Christian ideals to industry, the promotion of peace at home and abroad, of temperance and the publication of literature. Special reference was made to Joseph Rowntree's long personal connection with the boarding schools at Bootham and the Mount, also to the large part he took in shaping of more modern literature of the Society of Friends. His interest in Woodbrook increased year by year, and he took constant pleasure in hearing of the pioneer work done at the non-residential settlements. The trustees realise how much they feel the loss of their founder as they pursue the work that he asked them to cooperate in. Their close association with him has, however, given them the opportunity of understanding his wishes regarding the use of income and capital of the trust, and with the help provided by his letters of April 16th and 4th of June 1919. They hope that they may be able to carry out adequately his far-seeing desires.
Hello. Hi, I'm Hannah. I grew up in York, and actually reflecting on Joseph Rowntree a little bit, he's played quite a big part in my life personally, as well as what I'm going to talk to you about today. My family actually moved to York when my dad got a job at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Fast forward 25-ish years, I was working at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation myself, and it is where I met my fiancé. So he's got a lot to answer for, Joseph Rowntree. But I'm here today to speak as a trustee of the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. It's an honour to be a trustee at the organisation he founded 120 years ago, and to continue to build on his legacy by supporting organisations and individuals working for a more just and equitable society. We currently fund 340 people and organisations, from well-known organisations like Liberty, Reprieve, or the Quaker United Nations office in Geneva, to smaller organisations like Disabled People Against Cuts or the Northern Ireland Rural Women's Network. As we've heard, Joseph Rowntree believed that you must tackle the roots of a problem to achieve any lasting benefit. Treating the superficial manifestations of social or economic problems might provide temporary relief, but won't create lasting solutions. We continue to be inspired by this, and our mission is to support those tackling the root causes of conflict and injustice to drive systemic change. We've recently carried out an archiving project, and this has shown that since 1905, when the first grants were made, the Trust has made more than 10,000 grants to over 3,000 separate entities, amounting to around £225 million. 100 years on from Joseph Rowntree's death, we continue to adapt our approach, but our core purpose remains the same. We continue to build on Joseph Rowntree's legacy to ensure sustained and considered support for the people and organisations doing vital work to address the root causes of conflict and injustice. It's a cause which seems ever more relevant in an increasingly complex and unequal world. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I call on the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust?
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you, Nick, for organising this. My name's Sue Mendes, and I'm here today with my colleague, Nikki Milstead, representing the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust, which began life in 1904 as the Joseph Rowntree Social Service Trust Limited, and I'll say something about Limited in a moment. But I'm asked to begin by reading from the minute book of the meeting which took place immediately after the death of Joseph Rowntree. So this is the meeting of the Social Service Trust Limited, as then was for March of 1925. It reads, "At this meeting of the Joseph Rowntree Social Service Trust, the first held since the death of the founder, gratitude was expressed for the large opportunity that had been given to the trustees through Joseph Rowntree's generous endowment to help forward well-devised schemes for social betterment, to assist in the formation of sound public opinion by the wise utilization of the press and the publication of books, to promote the study of political, economic, and social science, statistics, the history and the theory and the practice of education, and to initiate investigations into the causes of social evils," the causes again. Reference was made to the careful thought given by JR to the definition of the objects upon which he felt the endowment could be spent, and to his earnest desire that his concern for the welfare of individuals should be continued by those associated with him in the trust. Whilst feeling keenly the loss of the loved founder, the trustees are thankful for the great privilege of having been associated with him during the past 20 years in the administration of the trust. In this way, opportunities have been given to them of understanding his own wishes, and they hope that in the administration of the trust, the future may be able to make further substantial steps towards carrying out his far-seeing desires. So the question then is, well, what are or were his far-seeing desires? I've said several times that the nature of the Reform Trust as now is, and Social Service Trust as then was, is that it is limited. It is a limited company. That is to say, we are not a charitable trust. We pay taxes and we can fund pretty much anything we want to fund. And that is not an accident. Joseph Rowntree was extremely eager that a sum of money be set aside, which could be used for, broadly speaking, political purposes. And of course, if you're a charity, that is not open to you. And so he wrote, and it's an extraordinary statement in the memorandum, he wrote to the directors of the then Social Service Trust. Here it comes. "Perhaps the greatest danger to our national life arises from the power of selfish and unscrupulous wealth, which influences public opinion largely through the press. If the funds permitted and the directors of the Social Service Trust were equal to the task, it would be quite in accordance with my wishes that they should control, by purchase or otherwise, a newspaper or newspapers, conducting them not with a primary view to profit, but with the object of influencing public thought in right channels." So it's a political encouragement, in a broad sense of the word political. It's an encouragement to use the funds of the trust to direct public opinion in right channels. And I should say, it's obvious, but I say it anyway, the context of this injunction is the Boer War. I mean, what has happened immediately before this is that Britain is at war in South Africa, and nearly all the newspapers are warmongering newspapers. I say no more about how times change and nonetheless stay the same. Nearly all the newspapers are warmongering newspapers, and he is therefore encouraging the Trust to use its money to buy newspapers which will direct public opinion in right channel, that is to say, in channels which are peaceable and which are not warmongering. And that's what happened. The Joseph Rowntree Social Service Trust, as was, purchased the Northern Echo and subsequently owned a consortium called the North of England Newspaper Company. And that was as part of a concerted and strenuous attempt to channel public opinion in the right direction, against war and in favour of peace. We still do that. We don't own newspapers anymore. Times have changed and that's not possible. So the Reform Trust does not own newspapers anymore, but we do fund, for instance, Hacked Off, which was an organisation formed at the time of the Leveson inquiry. We also fund Impress and the campaign, or have funded, and the campaign for freedom of information, as well as Reporters Without Borders. And the aim throughout here is to give support to those organisations which campaign for both freedom and accountability of the press. They aren't always harmonious, those two concepts, but it's to support the freedom and the accountability of the press. A second strand, and then I'll finish, a second strand, which we pursue again with the encouragement of Joseph Rowntree, is campaigns and organisations which try to ensure fair electoral processes and policies. He writes in that same memorandum about the importance of the purity of election and how proud he is that at York elections are pure. And so we have similarly, in that spirit, we have funded in the democracy space organisations such as Unlock Democracy, which are concerned with voter ID, freedom of information, open democracy, and my personal favourite, Boaty McBoatface, which is a campaign to encourage people who live on canal boats to register to vote, because they often, no pun intended, they often slip through the net because they're travelling. So we try in those ways to remain true to the legacy of Joseph Rowntree, and I think it's fair to say we are hugely grateful that we have, through this political endowment, an ability to do things which not many other organisations can do, a freedom that isn't given to many. So that's all from me, but I'm sitting here next to Sally Ann Shern, who is at the Borthwick Institute for Archive up at the University of York, and all the Rowntree Reform, there's a huge Rowntree archive there, all the Reform Trust archive is there, and is very, very, it's been beautifully catalogued and sorted by Sally Ann, and it is freely available for anybody who wishes to consult it. So it's a rich treasury, and I hope you will look. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sue. And for our final speaker, can we hear from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation?
I'm going to step into the light. This is the place to do it. I am the final speaker, so I am now the only thing standing between you and a cup of tea, so I will definitely stick to my 5 minutes. I'm Paul Kizik. I'm the Group Chief Executive of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust. Both of those organisations grew out of the Village Trust that was set up by Joseph Rowntree. From what you've heard this afternoon, you probably think the principal function of the foundation is either to stop Joseph turning in his grave, following Michael's work, or to find Hannah a fiancé. They are both very important roles of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, but our principal function, in fact, is to address the underlying causes of poverty and build a more equitable society, work which we carry on today. In fact, what I'd like to do today is focus more on the Housing Trust. Because a century ago, Joseph Rowntree's vision for better housing was revolutionary. He believed homes should be more than just shelter. They should be places of beauty and dignity and community, and his work in New Earswick set a global example. And I'd like to bring a couple of voices into the room from the funeral 100 years ago. So the first is from J.H. Holloway's, representing New Earswick Village. We always felt that Joseph Rowntree maintained the keenest possible interest in village affairs. He had conceived the idea of housing for his workers and others in well-planned dwellings. But he knew it wasn't enough to erect houses, not enough to endow them with gardens, to make the surroundings harmonious and beautiful. He was after a greater thing, to bring into being a community where friendliness could be cultivated and unity of interests realized. He wanted to see the body develop a soul. And to this end, he planned the folk hall and generously handed it over so that the people of New Earswick should have a centre around which their religious and educational and social life should revolve, where the community spirit might be fanned for vigorous life. A second voice from 100 years ago, H.R. Aldridge, Secretary of the National Housing and Town Planning Council. I was not privileged to meet your father more than once or twice, but I then realised how deep his love for his fellow men really was. I have said not once but many times that I regard New Earswick, from the point of view of quiet beauty of layout, as one of the finest examples of housing that the world has today. We owe this to your father, and I should like to be permitted to say, for those housing reformers who stand for better housing, as well as an increase in the supply, how deeply we desire to pay homage to the great achievements which have crowned a life characterised by a love for humanity. I think that when the history of the first quarter of the 20th century comes to be written, the name Rowntree will stand out as that of one of the leading social pioneers of the time. Like the other trusts, the Charitable Trust and the Reform Trust, just a couple of weeks after the funeral, the trustees of the Village Trust gathered together, many of them members of the Rowntree family. And this is what the minute book records from Wednesday, the 11th of March, 1925. Death of the founder. Those responsible for administering the Joseph Rowntree Village Trust and the New Earswick Village are meeting for the first time since the death of its founder, Joseph Rowntree, wish to record their deep sense of loss. Nevertheless, they are thankful. He lived to see the scheme on which he had lavished not only wealth but thought and care well on its way to full maturity. New Earswick, providing as it does healthy and happy conditions of housing and environment for a large number of citizens, is not only valuable for its own sake, it has served an object lesson in this and other countries to all who wish to secure ideal homes for the people. JR's sympathy for his tenants, his anxiety for the welfare of the children, and his desire to promote the sense of civic responsibility can never be forgotten by those who take advantage of the many opportunities provided by the folk hall and the school. Today, the Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust continues to uphold the proud legacy, ensuring that high-quality affordable homes remain at the heart of our mission. In partnership with the City of York Council, we're expanding affordable housing in New Earswick. New homes designed with the same principles that Joseph championed: community, green spaces, and sustainability, ensuring that his vision continues to shape the future. But housing isn't enough, not alone. Joseph understood that strong communities thrive when people have spaces to connect, learn, and grow. And that's why we continue to invest in places like the folk hall and the discovery room, strengthening social bonds, creating opportunities. These spaces are more than just buildings. They're the heart of our community, where friendships are formed, skills are shared, and people come together. Joseph Rowntree's legacy was built on a deep commitment to social progress and a belief in a fairer, more connected society. Today, his vision remains as relevant as ever, inspiring us to shape the future while honouring the past. Thank you.
Wow. That went even better than I imagined it would. Thank you for everyone. And thank you to all of you in the room, because I think we all bring something of ourselves to these spaces, and I certainly found that really powerful. And I hope it got something across, this idea of community, of Joseph. We're not just celebrating one man, we're thinking about ideas of what that life stood for. Just before we come to the close, I've got a few things I want to talk about. The first thing is that when Joseph died, the Cocoa Works, the factory, produced a special edition of their in-house magazine, the Cocoa Works magazine. We've been able to reprint that special edition for everyone who's attended this event. So please come to the stall out the back, out the front even, or come and find one of us from the Rowntree Society and we'll be able to give you one of those for free. We also have at the stall biographies of Joseph Rowntree that for sale, and Rowntree Society tote bags that have that quote about finding out the causes of poverty, not just alleviating them. We've also got lots of leaflets and other literature out there as well. As I said at the start, this is the first event of the Joseph Rowntree Centenary. We really want this year to be something that brings York together and to bring, I guess, the Rowntree community together. So the Rowntree Society are calling on anyone who wants to mark it by doing their own events or anything at all to get in touch with us, and we can help you out, give you some support, resources, or put you in touch with each other, because sometimes people come to us with the same idea. We can join you up. We don't just want this year to be the Rowntree Society doing things. We want everyone, the whole community, to get involved. So go to our website, which is rowntreesociety.org.uk. There are leaflets out at our store that have that address on, or bookmarks, so that you can go and find more about that. And the best way of finding out what the Rowntree Society are doing is to sign up to our email newsletter. You can do that on our website. And there's also a bit on our website where you can donate to us so we can continue doing this kind of work. I'm now going to hand over to Liz Grierson, the Rowntree Society's Chair of Trustees, to draw it to a close.
I don't know about everybody else, but this is my first reenactment of a memorial or funeral event that I have ever heard of or actually ever attended. This was Nick's idea, a way to look at the life, work and ideas of Joseph Rowntree as they were seen at the time of death, while also reflecting his legacy 100 years on. So thank you, Nick, from all of us, for your tenacity and enthusiasm to bring this vision to life, and for your helpers, Beth, who I don't think is here, and Olivia, who is, for their invaluable work with social media and logistics. We're also grateful to the Friends of this Meeting House for generously providing both the venue and the refreshments that we've been holding you back from, and I'm holding you back from even further, that are definitely on the way. And we particularly want to thank Eleanor Rhodes for helping facilitate this. Eleanor is also a fellow trustee of the Rowntree Society. A heartfelt thanks to all our speakers for sharing insights into them then and now, and to Barbara Windle for shedding light on Quaker faith and funerary practices. I found that talk absolutely extraordinary, and you painted a picture that I couldn't have wished to have had formed in any other way of what the event must have felt like to others coming into this space. This is a copy of the booklet that you will be getting that we have reprinted for you. And I thought the opening lines of it is a quote from John Ruskin. And it says, "Every noble life leaves the fibre of it interwoven forever in the work of the world. By so much evermore the strength of the human race has gained." And I think what was very striking in the talks of then and now was how strong this fibre of Joseph Rowntree's life has remained. At the time when they were writing that, well, did they know? It seems evident that they did know what a remarkable person had gone, and also we now see what a remarkable legacy he has left. When I collected these booklets yesterday, the man who handed them over to me said, "I wish there were more people like Joseph Rowntree around today." Well, I hope that this event, along with the others planned in this centenary year, will in some small way help this wish to come true. And finally, I want to thank you all for coming. Your interest and your support in keeping the remarkable Rowntree legacy alive is invaluable and well worth continuing. Now, at last, for all of you, it is time for us to have tea and conversation out there. Thank you. Bye.